Government Order of the Day, number 1 to 3.
Environment Canterbury Transitional Governance Arrangements Bill, Committee Stage. Te Pere mō Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Bill, Committee Stage. Drug and Alcohol Testing of Community-Based Offenders, Baileys and Other Persons Legislation Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Environment Canterbury Transitional Governance Arrangements Bill, the Te Pere mō Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Bill, and the Drug and Alcohol Testing of Community-Based Offenders, Baileys and Other Persons Legislation Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. Members, the House is in committee for consideration of the Environment Canterbury Transitional Governance Arrangements Bill, the Pere mō Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Bill, and the Drug and Alcohol Testing of Community-Based Offenders, Baileys and Other Persons Legislation Bill. Members, we turn first to the Environment Canterbury Transitional Governance Arrangements Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Mr. Chairman.
I call Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to take a call on Part 1 of this bill to spell out why it is that Labor will not, cannot and will never support this legislation. Part 1 of the bill that contains the preliminary provisions of this bill, that is clauses 3 through 7, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, actually contain some pretty important elements of this legislation. First and foremost, Mr. Chairman, is the purpose clause of this legislation, where I would like to turn my attention to. This is, of course, the section of the Act that tells us what it is going to do. So the purpose of the Act is to provide for the governance arrangements for the Canterbury Regional Council that will operate during the 2016 to 2019 local authority election cycle period. But, Mr. Speaker, it is subclause 2 that I'd like to first of all turn my attention to, where it says, to this end, this Act replaces the Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioners and Improved Water Management Act 2010 and provides for a new governing body for the Canterbury Regional Council, comprising a mix of elected and appointed members. This is, of course, what the Minister has euphemistically refers to as a mixed model of democracy. This, of course, being a minister who thinks democracy is a little bit too risky and something that we as elected members should exercise caution before allowing back into any part of our country. But, Mr. Speaker, the first question, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like the Minister and the Chair to address is an issue that is, of course, raised by officials in the regulatory impact statement, and that is around the consultation document that lay behind this piece of legislation that preceded it, why it was that it only went out and really gave a fait accompli of this one model being there. A range of options were not canvassed in terms of what the future of Canterbury would hold. This is something that submitters to the bill raised, in particular the Christchurch City Council, in both their submission on the discussion document that preceded this legislation and their written and oral submissions on the legislation to the Select Committee, raised particular questions about why it was that this is the path the Minister chose to go down, that it was only one option, and Treasury, of course, found the need to raise questions about this in the regulatory impact statement and say that it couldn't give the kind of advice that it otherwise would if this had been practiced differently. So I am looking forward to hearing the Minister give us an explanation of why it was that only this single option was put forward in the discussion document. Because, Mr. Chairman, it wasn't like the Minister didn't know this was coming. It had been nearly 3 years since he'd last cancelled elections in Canterbury, and he had plenty of time to plan for the next phase and what came next. So that is in the purpose statement that I would like to hear from the Minister. I also would like to then turn my attention to Clause 6 of this legislation in Part 1, which is the clause that deals with the repeal of this legislation. Now, Mr Chairman, it's actually only a few days over the 6th anniversary of when it was the Minister first sacked our elected representative council in Canterbury, our regional council, and replaced them with Crown appointees. When that council was first sacked in 2010, there were a lot of statements made in the media, and the Prime Minister was even moved to make some statements to say it may be as late as 2013 before Canterbury could have representative democracy back in its region. But did that happen? No, it didn't, Mr Chairman, because what happened before the expiration of that 2010 legislation is, of course, the Minister just put in place another piece of legislation that extended the Crown appointees over elected representatives in the region of Christchurch. So we have absolutely no faith that the repeal date of this legislation will in fact, in essence, be what is stated in Clause 6 of the bill. So when it says that it's repealed on the close of the resumption day, we know that behind the scenes, Mr Chairman, there have been moves by various government agencies to make permanent the situation that the Minister is putting into place. We know through Official Information Act requests, Mr Chairman,
Dr Megan Woods.
we know through Official Information Act requests, Mr Chairman, that the Ministry for Primary Industries was lobbying, asking that the situation where the Crown appoints half the regional councillors in the case of Canterbury be made permanent. And Mr Chairman, I would like to hear from the Minister in this committee stage of this legislation an assurance to the people of Canterbury that there will be, should they still be in government, but won't be the case because we'll be able to take care of that, but more on that later, Mr Chairman, but an absolute assurance that in the Minister's mind, this is the last piece of draconian legislation that takes away democratic rights from the people of Canterbury. As we get more into the substantive parts of this legislation, in Part 2, Mr Chairman, we will talk more fully about what some of the problems are. But I want to know from the Minister that this is what he means this time. Because when you read through the documents that went prior to the discussion document being issued, I have no faith, Mr Chairman. I have no faith that in the Minister's mind this is the end of the road. And we have no cause to have faith in Canterbury because we have had our votes stolen twice. Not only in 2010, but by the subsequent legislation that came into play for the 2013 election. At the time when votes were first taken away, there were jokes going around. Will Canterbury or Fiji be first to have democratic elections? Well, the Minister can be proud to say he is presiding over a region that is standing firm and not returning to democracy. Because this and what is being proposed and defined under in Part 1 in the interpretation clause and Clause 4 of this legislation in no way represents a return to democracy. The Minister seems to think you can be a little bit democratic in a way you might like to be a little bit pregnant. But Mr Chairman, that a return to democracy means giving Cantabrians the right to elect their regional councillors. This legislation does not do that. It does not return Canterbury to what the rest of the country enjoys, and that is democratically elected regional council. The Minister needs to justify this, and I look forward to the Minister taking call and justifying this because he has failed to do so to this date. There is simply no justification for this. The kinds of arguments that we have put up, that democracy is a little bit risky, well, the people that elect this Minister might like to be a little bit afraid that their elected representatives considered the system of representation under which he is elected is risky. The other, I'm sure we'll get into those debates more fully in the more substantive parts of this bill, the idea that this has to be done for the good of Canterbury. We will have a discussion about water quality in Canterbury, and we will see that in the 6 years since the commissioners have been in place, we have seen a decline of water quality in our region. So I look forward to hearing from the Minister what the justifications are, why he never went to the people of Canterbury with a broader set of proposals and an assurance that in his mind this is the end of the road. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Eugenie Sage.